Hello, and welcome to the Moms Love Coaching Podcast, where we talk about self-care from the inside out for moms. I'm your host, Carrie McFarland, along with Angie Turgeon-Ledoux. We are certified life coaches and moms, and in this podcast, we'll go beyond the take a spa day advice and talk about real and sustainable ways that you can feel better, be happier, and stay out of overwhelm and burnout. You spend your life taking care of everyone else. In this podcast, each week, it's all about you taking care of you with no guilt and no apologies. We're so happy that you've decided to spend this time with us, so go ahead and grab your favorite cup of coffee, find a comfortable place, and get ready to spend the next 30 minutes focusing on the most important person in your life, you. Welcome everybody to Moms Love Coaching, Self-Care from the Inside Out for Moms. I am Carrie McFarland. I'm with Angie Turgeon-Ledoux. Hi, Angie.
Hi, everybody.
How are we doing today? It's raining here. What's it doing there?
It's just a little dreary. The dog is wet. So it was raining at some point when she went outside. Yeah, so it's a welcome relief to the heat of the last week. So that's okay. We're good with it. Don't have the air conditioners running like I did earlier this week. So
it's drizzly here. Speaking of dogs, so I'm taking my dog to the groomer today because she needs a bath very badly. I saw on Instagram a video of a dog who they have like a sink on the floor. I assume it's for him, but he turned it on. He filled up the sink just enough, turned the water off, washed his ball, put it on the table, and then washed all his paws, not with soap, but like got in the sink, put one paw in at a time, turned around, did his back paws, barked for his owner to come dry his paws off because they didn't set up a towel for him to be able to step on. I'm sure he would have done that if they had done that, but so yeah, and the caption was something like, "This is what it's like to have a self-sufficient dog." I'm like, yeah, I want that dog.
Yeah, no kidding. Holy, that's a smart dog.
That is a smart dog. All right, so this week we are still continuing our series of feelings that can keep you stuck. So we are talking about anxiety today, the feeling that can keep you stuck. One of them is anxiety. Now, we already talked about fear. And so some of you might be thinking, well, that's kind of the same thing. And it's sort of the same thing, but they're really different. They have different characteristics, although they can feel the same. You can have the same physical reactions with anxiety as you do with fear, but they are different. So we're going to talk about the differences. We're going to talk about what you can do to alleviate your anxiety. We're going to talk about some positive things that come with anxiety because, like any emotion, there's sort of the 50-50. There's some positive and some negative. So we're going to talk about some of the positive things too. And then Angie and I both have some anxiety stories. If you have been listening to this, you've probably heard some of my anxiety stories, but I have a specific anxiety story that also has a resolution it became a resolution to me for anxiety, and we can talk about that. But when we were researching this topic and trying to figure out exactly what the difference is between fear and anxiety, this is what we came up with. And I think this is pretty spot on. So fear is a response to a real, immediate threat and is often short term. Right? So if you think about it, fear is seeing your kid fall off the slide. That's fear. You see a car in front of you slam into somebody, and so you have fear.
It requires an immediate reaction and response.
Yeah.
Not necessarily an action, but you're going to have an immediate response to that physically.
So it's short term because when the stressor is gone, then you kind of go back to normal, right? It might take a little bit, but you go back to feeling okay. Anxiety is different because anxiety is a response to a perceived or potential threat. So it's not really something that has happened or is happening. it's just sort of this vague, generalized feeling. It's not really linked to anything. It's just sort of like, well, something bad could happen kind of a feeling. That's more chronic. It doesn't really go away. There are things that people do to kind of alleviate it in the moment, but it always comes back. And it's just this generalized feeling like something could go wrong, something could go wrong, something could go wrong. So that's kind of the basic differences between fear and anxiety. Fear is sort of immediate about a tangible threat, and anxiety is more chronic, and it's just sort of this vague feeling that you have. Would you agree with that, Angie?
Yeah, I think back in the day when I was a kid, my grandmother, we would describe her as a worrier, and she just like fretted about things. Like when we went down to visit her, she lived an hour and a half away from us, and when we'd go to visit, we'd always have Kentucky Fried Chicken. So then I just remember her, worrying about, oh, we need to get all this, and worrying about taking care of all that stuff. So she had some anxiety about that situation, and we just called her a worrier.
Yeah, I mean, somewhere in her brain, she was worried about maybe, I don't know, not getting there in time. Maybe she was worried that you wouldn't have fun, or, who knows?
People are going to get, who knows what it was about. But there was definitely anxiety.
Yeah. And she probably didn't even know quite what it was about, because when I look back on when my anxiety was at the height, I thought I knew what it was, but it's sort of like, I always call it a mirage, because you think about it in a way where you are like, well, this is what I'm anxious about. This is the thing. But then when you stop and really think about it, it kind of changes. It's not quite that. It's not quite that. It's more like this, but it's not really that. And it's like, it just sort of like, you can't really pinpoint it because it isn't anything specific. It's just so big in your brain that it makes it feel important that you worry and are anxious about whatever the thing is. There really is no real threat, but it feels real to you because you feel like there is a real threat. That's also why it's prolonged, because the threat never really goes away, because you don't really know what it is. And it's just sort of like out there as this amorphous, like anxious or anxiety provoking thing. It hangs around. It's anticipatory. So you're thinking about, well, it could happen. It could happen. What if? My anxiety was highly centered around my kids when my kids were younger. And some of it was like, I had this thing about being late. And so you could say, well, you can attach it to that. You were afraid about being late, but it wasn't like, that's what I mean when I say, when you delve into it, it wasn't about being late necessarily. It was just sort of, being late was wrong in my mind, right? Being late was wrong. And so I needed to avoid it. But I still don't really know why. I don't know why I had that in my head, because it doesn't really matter if you're late, right? But for some reason, it was like the worst thing that could happen. And so I would get very anxious and very like, come on, hurry up and get your shoes on and do this and blah, 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 and it was just like rushing around for really no reason. We weren't going to be late for anything. It was just like, I had to get there.
If you look back to when you first started becoming conscious that was happening for you, I'd be curious to find out when that was, because I had this thing, and now I know now from looking back that it was anxiety about leaving the house. So it would turn into this big thing. Before I knew it, Brett and I were having knockdown, drag out fight, because I had to like clean the whole house before we could leave. And that usually was 3 minutes before we needed to be out the door. Right. So highly ineffective. But the anxiety, it could be worse on some days than others regarding that situation. And I think it was because I trained my brain to be sensitive to whatever that group of thoughts were, And so for you, if it was being late, something must have happened that a thought created a thought in your brain that it was a bad thing. And it might have just
Right.
been how I feel when I walk into a place and I'm late, or the comment my older sister makes when I am arriving 10 minutes late, right? It could
Right.
be whatever that is, that then your brain associates with a feeling of not being safe, because that anxiety is very much about a fear and triggering a place inside you that doesn't feel safe, whatever that is.
And, that's where that physical response comes from, because you're not feeling safe. And that's why it feels similar to fear with, you can have racing heart and swirling thoughts and butterfly feeling in your stomach, like all of that stuff, right? So all of that can be similar. It's just that it's just not connected to anything very specific. I mean, my thing about being late could be all the way back to when I was in school, right? Because you don't want to be late, because then you get in trouble. And so it could just be that, like, it just sort of seeped into my DNA that you're not late because it's bad. I mean, there's things that happen that you don't really remember that your body remembers. And that's just one example. Obviously, you can be anxious about a million different things. Some of the reasons why, or that, we chose anxiety as a feeling that can keep you stuck. And when I say stuck, I mean, you're not growing and evolving as a person in the way that you would want to. You want to do more, or you can do more, but you're just not doing it. And anxiety can be one of the reasons for that, because it's holding you back. It just kind of keeps you in this negative thinking spiral. It's sort of like that negative self-talk. You talk yourself out of things because, you can't do that. That's for other people. You're not smart enough. You don't know enough. All those things that go through your head when you want to try something new. And it all kind of stems back to your brain is basically afraid. It's back to safety, because when you want to try something new, it feels unsafe. And when you feel unsafe, you retreat from it. And part of the way that you do that is by talking yourself out of things with that negative self-talk, right? But then you believe those thoughts like they're true, like you don't know enough. You have to get more education. Nobody's going to listen to you. It's for other people. And that's all that negative self-talk. And that is one of the ways that your brain kind of puts the brakes on whatever it is that you're thinking of doing.
That seems like something you've dealt with even recently, with the
Yeah.
brain just being like, you can't do this. You're going to fail. You can't do this. This is going to be horrible.
And that's 100% true. I do that, right? I mean, I think we all do that. And then the difference between me doing that now and me doing that 10 years ago is that I know that those thoughts aren't true. Whereas 10 years ago, I would just stop. I mean, I had ideas that I wanted to follow through on, throughout my whole life, that I dropped because I convinced myself that it wasn't the right time. I don't know enough. People know better than me. I don't know what I'm doing, right? And I would just be like, yeah, I really don't. And so I would just drop it. Now I know when those things come up, it's really my brain's way of trying to keep me safe, because it feels scary to go do something new. So that's the difference. And that's how you have anxiety and not let it keep you stuck. And we'll actually talk about that in a little bit, the way to feel it and let it process through and not let it stop you, because we're always going to have anxiety. Anxiety is not going to go away. It has a biological function. It helps you anticipate things that could hurt you. And that is a necessary function that our brain has. It's just that when you let it kind of go off the rails and control your life, that's when it's too much, right? That's when people start having issues. But it really, you can control it in such a way that it doesn't keep you stuck. Taking risks, like I said, is scary. it's scary to take a risk. And so it's easy to talk yourself out of those things. But the other thing we kind of touched on is that self-doubt, right? All of that is related to keeping you where you are. So you stay safe and you don't risk anything. Now, your brain doesn't know the difference between risking your life and risking rejection, right? One can kill you, one can't, but your brain doesn't know the difference. It thinks everything's going to kill you. So
right. It's funny, it just triggers the same response in your brain in the base,
right,
in the amygdala, right? In the base of your brain.
right. Yeah, exactly. And that's why it feels so real. That's why it feels so strong, is because that's where it's coming from. So there are, like we talked, there's some physical symptoms. One of them is fatigue from anxiety. And here's why. When you feel unsafe for any reason, your body goes into fight or flight. And I know that there's other categories now, but for the purposes of this conversation, we'll just talk about fight or flight. So your nervous system is triggered and it goes into fight or flight. Now, again, that has a purpose because you either need to run or you need to hunker down to stay alive. This is what your brain thinks. The problem is when you have generalized anxiety and you are in that state constantly, because remember, this is chronic. This isn't fear. This isn't short-lived. This is chronic. This goes on for a long time. Your body is constantly in that fight or flight state. Your nervous system is constantly working to try to regulate yourself to get back to, a state where you don't feel that way. It's tiring, right? So it does create fatigue. And I don't know about you, but when I'm tired, either physically or mentally or both, I don't want to do anything. Right. So I'm going to stay in that maybe comfortable state on the couch and just watch Netflix or whatever, because I'm tired. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to put myself out there. Right. So all of those things really do keep you stuck. Do you think I forgot anything? Is there something else in there do you think keeps you stuck?
I mean, I think lack of self-awareness. If we're going to talk about why it keeps you stuck, then ways to get unstuck, the more aware that you are. So say you're not aware of what's happening, but you just know that you can't seem to overcome your inertia. It might be that your brain has gotten so good at hiding this from you that you don't even realize that just, you might think I don't want to do it. I just don't want to do it. But if you dig down, why don't you want to do it? What? And then because so I am going to talk about an anxiety story the other day. I have developed over the years social anxiety. And it seems that if it's in a crowd.
Thanks, pandemic.
Yeah, no kidding. I think I had it happening before the pandemic, but definitely when I've always had a thing about, not always had a thing, but about walking into a situation where there's going to be people that I don't know. And I think this also goes along with my hearing, as I've become more hard of hearing. And so earlier this week, we had a meeting on Juneteenth. It was a diversity, equity, and inclusion meeting for my work. And I thought it was just going to be my team, the team that I work with all the time. I forgot that when I walked in, there were some teachers in that group too. And I'm like, oh no, I forgot. I didn't know who was going to be here. And I immediately went into flight. I want to get out of here. I sat down first of all, I stood there awkwardly while they added more chairs to the group. That feels great. I was a few minutes on the late side because I thought it was in one place and it wasn't. It was in another place. So you had to, find that place. What was interesting is I sat down and I'm between two of my colleagues who, I feel safe with. And somebody started talking and I was like, I can't be here. I need to leave. I backed my seat up. And that was when awareness kicked in, where it was like, okay, you can leave. It'll be okay. You can stay here and just breathe through this and it'll be okay. And that all played out in a matter of minutes, in which I could then calm myself down so that I could stay in the group, and the anxiety abated. I think because I was aware of it, and because I just allowed it to be there. Like, this is what this is. This is just anxiety. No one's going to die here. You're going to be okay. You can do this. It was like, totally had to talk myself into it. I mean, it worked out. I stayed.
Yeah. You could have just as easily talked yourself out of it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Could have easily said, you're right. This is a dangerous place. Got to get the heck out.
Yeah. Or, or something like, this is stupid. I don't need to be here. I already know this stuff. Why am I even here? I'm not paid to do this, right? I mean, that's kind of how it would come up, right? Like, this is just
be more like, I don't know these people. I hate these people.
Yeah, I'm never going to see these people again. Why do I need to be here? You know what I mean? So, yeah. So let's talk about ways to alleviate anxiety, because there are some ways. I think one of these ways is better than another, but there are definitely different ways. So gradual exposure to something is one way to help alleviate anxiety. So that would be, so in your case, Angie, with the group, right? It would be more like, all right, you're going to go to that group and you're going to stay there for 10 minutes and then you're going to leave, right? And then the next time you would stay there for 15 minutes and then 20 minutes and that, right? And so you would gradually build yourself up to where you can tolerate being there. I think that's a fine way to do it. I don't think it gets necessarily to the root of being able to transfer that to other things you might be anxious about. So in other words, if you did that with the group and you were also anxious in other situations, then you would need to do it for every situation, I think.
I do think it's like a muscle that you can strengthen, and that if you can learn to allow the anxiety to be there and not answer the urge to run away, you become stronger in that you probably can get yourself to a state of calm faster, which could happen in any number of I think that's transferable across situations. I was thinking about people who are afraid of dogs. I have every reason to be afraid of a dog because I suffered a dog bite when I was 6. And, I had this arm was in a cast and then the dog bit the other arm, and I have a reason to be afraid of dogs. So especially that particular dog, like being exposed to that dog in little bits where, I understand why it bit me, and then, was in a situation where just we got used to each other. All of the things that we're talking about today aren't they impact your life, but not to the point where you can't engage in your life. We're not talking about folks with so much anxiety they can't leave the house, like agoraphobic or something like that. We're talking about
or something centered around trauma or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, we're just more talking about sort of the everyday anxiety that people kind of experience, like you said, with the social anxiety, right?
For moms, I'm just thinking about when you were talking earlier, I was thinking, okay, it must have been when iPhone came out with the capability of having a Find My iPhone on it. And especially after they started driving, that was like, oh my God, they're out there. They're not safe, blah, blah, blah. And if they didn't come home, when I said they need to come home, it would be like, oh, where are they? But having that tool, that Find My iPhone tool, there are some tools that help you learn to trust that you're going to be okay. Like they're safe. There's that sort of anxiety. How many times when you had babies, do you go to put your hand on them to make sure that they're breathing?
I still do that sometimes.
Yeah, me too. Like you just look at them, are they breathing?
Yeah.
So
is that cover moving?
Yeah, it's anxiety or like an irrational fear, I think. Have you heard this thing where people say like the size of the reaction that you're having shows how much you care about something? It makes sense that the love for your children is we can't even fathom how deep that really goes, right? And the fear for their safety and the concern for their safety of course it's going to trigger some of those insecurities, those fears, those anxieties about the fear of something bad happening. Also the anxiety of waiting for it to, like, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So
Yeah.
definitely you finding some tools that help you help you overcome
Yeah.
that.
I mean,
It might be a false sense of security, but at least I know it helps me to go to sleep.
You talked about this a little bit, just the mindfulness and relaxation techniques, breathing, just sort of centering yourself and coming. Like, my phrase is always, when I can feel myself winding up and getting to a state, my phrase is always, nothing bad has happened. Nothing bad has actually happened. In the case, like you said, about your kids being out and they're not home yet, nothing bad has happened. Everything will be fine. Just kind of bringing yourself to that reality state so you can think clearly, because that's the other thing. I mean, fear does this too, and anxiety certainly does this. It skews your thinking. So it's like, once you start thinking about all the things that could go wrong, it's like that's all you can think about. And the thing about the iPhone, the Find My iPhone, and I know a lot of people do this, and I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I wonder how much of that sort of feeds into the anxiety in the first place, right? Because I think of it like Monster spray, right? You know, the different theories about the monster spray, you know, when kids are afraid of monsters under their bed or whatever, and you're like, oh, well, I have this monster spray, so I'll just spray it and you'll be okay, and the kid calms down. But in reality, what you're doing is reinforcing the fact that there really is a monster under the bed, and I have to spray it to make it go away. It's sort of like, you want to acknowledge their fear without feeding into the fear. And I think we need to do that with ourselves too. We acknowledge the fear without or the anxiety without feeding into the anxiety. You know, and then of course, support networks, professional help, both of those things are definitely things that can help you with your anxiety. The thing that I think is, or the technique that I think is the fastest, maybe the most painful, but definitely the fastest, is literally just letting yourself feel it and not trying to push it away with tips or tricks or tools. Or you're feeling anxious and you just feel it. Where are you feeling it? How does it feel? Feelings are called feelings for a reason, because it creates a physical sensation in your body. And so what is that physical sensation? Is it buzzing? Is it butterflies? Is it sweating? Is it, is it all those things? Like, what is it? And really going through, and there are some techniques that you can use to be able to do that. And actually I have something, for people if they want to try that. So I'll put that link in the show notes. But that really kind of leads me into my anxiety story. And some of you who listening may have heard this before, because I know that I've talked about it. But so 3 years ago, and actually it's about 3 years ago in a couple of weeks. Nope, I take that back. It's 3 years ago in September. Our dog is going to be 3 years old in July, and we got her in September, the end of September. And that was 3 years ago. So when we got this dog, I was completely unprepared for this dog. Like, I thought it was a great idea. I felt compelled to do it. I wanted to do it. I took the kids. We went to the shelter. You know, I contacted the shelter ahead of time. I did like all the things. I did the research. I did all the things, but I didn't realize how unprepared I was. So we got this dog, a puppy at the time, and brought her home. And everybody, excited and like, oh, yay, puppy, look how cute, right? But then when that wore off, I was like, we have a puppy. What the hell do I do with this puppy? Like, what do I do with it? I was like completely, I panicked. Like, when I say I panicked, I panicked. That first night that we had that dog, I literally did not sleep at all. I just laid in bed and I couldn't sleep, because my mind was racing so bad. And, you know, I had to get up a couple times with the dog because she was crying to go outside because she had to pee because she's a puppy. I didn't know about that. I thought dogs just slept through all night. I had no idea. Like, I didn't know anything. For 2 weeks, I was in this state of panic for 2 solid weeks. And I'm not kidding you when I say I was in a panic state for 2 weeks.
You didn't sleep?
I did sleep, but it was terrible. It was terrible sleep. The first night I did not sleep at all. Not at all. But the thing is I don't know why. Like, I don't know. Like, I just all of a sudden had this extreme feeling of I did something wrong. And that's the best way I can explain it. I felt like I did something wrong and I panicked.
I remember those coach meetings.
Yeah.
Dogs don't go.
I was like, I can't deal with this. The dog has to go back. I can't do it. I just can't do it. I don't know what I'm going to do. I was a mess.
Yep.
And Angie remembers. So 2 weeks I was like this, and it did last a little longer, but like the most extreme part of it was 2 weeks straight. I tried to talk myself out of it. Mm-hmm. I tried to talk to other people. I tried to do research about, you know, the best way to train your dog so I could feel more in control. I did all these things. None of it worked. I still was in a panic state. I finally, and I did this for 2 days. I took a half an hour at least, and I just started writing about what I was feeling inside my body. Right. And in my thoughts, like, it was like a mess. It was like I threw up all over these pages about like my thoughts and how I felt about it and everything. I mean, I filled up like, I don't know, 10 pages of stuff. Like, I mean, my hand hurt by the time I was done. I did this for 2 days straight. And then on the last day of this heightened panic state, all of a sudden, I just had this like wave come over me and this thought that said, you have handled much worse than this. You can do this. And literally it was gone. The panic about the dog was gone. And not only that, but my anxiety in general since that time is, I'm not going to say it's gone, but it's like 90% better. Like, I don't get anxious about things the way that I used to. And I attribute it to going through that, finally letting myself just feel it all the way through and getting it out of my system by writing it down and breathing. And then it just, like, I can't, like, it's just a different experience now. Like, things just don't bother me the same way.
You processed the emotion, yes. Right? You processed the emotion, allowed it to be there. You did use tools. You used a journaling. You used just sitting there and letting it be there. Like, so some might call that meditating on it or breathing through it. And those strategies can really helps your body and your brain come to a place of equilibrium where it's like, oh, I'm normal. I feel normal again. It's like that compounding. We've talked about that before, the compounding emotion where you are judging yourself for having the anxiety, especially if it's not going away, right? When you feel that way for a couple weeks, you know, you feel that way for a few days, it's disconcerting. If you can't figure out, well, this is ridiculous. I just got a dog and I'm losing my mind.
Right. I'm like, people get dogs every day. What is wrong with me? Yeah, I did have that thought. I'm like, what is wrong with me? People get dogs every day. Like, why am I doing this? You know, right. But I just couldn't shake the feeling that I did something terribly, terribly, terribly wrong. And I don't know what that was. I think it has something to do with my control issues, right? Because I couldn't control, like, I didn't know what to expect. I couldn't control, like, when she barked. I couldn't control when she slept. I couldn't control, like, it just felt very out of control for me. So I think that was a big part of it. But like, I firmly believe that everything happens for a reason. And I think the reason that I felt compelled to get that dog because it was really, I just had this thought in my head, we need to get a dog. And like 2 weeks later, we had a dog. I just had this thought. And then immediately when I got it, I was like, what did I do? Why did I get this dog?
That was the lesson? Is that what you're going to say? It was the lesson.
Well, I think what I have figured out is the reason that I felt compelled to get this dog is because I needed to go through that and show myself that I can get through that anxiety feeling and have it go all the way through and see that nothing bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
I firmly believe that. That's my anxiety story. I have many more, but
right.
That's the one I chose for this podcast.
We should probably just reiterate that if you're feeling anxiety and it's related to a traumatic experience, that's a different than the everyday anxieties that come up just as part of being a human and then being a mom and being concerned for your kids. So, just to be sure that if you are having anxiety that's impacting your daily life and your ability to function, that is definitely something to reach out to a professional for support.
Yeah. But I will say that you still can feel the anxiety. The technique that I described about writing it down and feeling it in your body, you can still do that. But in addition to reaching out for some sort of professional help if you feel like you need that. So you can do them in conjunction. You can do them together. So that's what we have about anxiety. It can keep you stuck if you're not aware, just like all the, we've talked about that in the other podcast. Being aware of it is kind of the first step to getting yourself unstuck, but just knowing that it does have a purpose. So anxiety in and of itself is not bad. It's just that you just don't want to let it take over your life. All right. That is what we have for you this week. Until next week, we will see you.
See y'all later.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to us if you like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify. This makes it easier for everyone to find us and helps us spread our message about self-care from the inside out. Have a wonderful week, and remember, making yourself the priority is the highest form of self-care.